Good evening. This is Thursday evening. I believe it's March 26th. Here we go again, another week. It's amazing. It's weird. But I just want to say greetings to each of you. And whenever you see this video, just know that our church functions, our church family is functioning, even though this is a strange way to do it. I don't know when we'll be seeing each other again in times of worship. I hope to get the board together the beginning of next week after Sunday. Probably we'll do it some sort of electronic way and look at Palm Sunday and see what we think. Right now it's not looking good because governors keep closing down schools for longer periods of time and so forth, as you all know. We will get word to you the best we can and take this thing a week at a time. But anyway, this is another message about Gideon. Somehow this man in this story has held my attention as I've been thinking about this virus and this crazy emergency situation under which we live, and these times that Gideon in his how those people there was an emergency for them because their land was invaded and times were strange and different for them. If you saw the video last week, you know that I talked about how the Lord came to Gideon and said, "You're a mighty warrior. Go in the strength that you have." Gideon wasn't sure, and he said, "Well, if you're with us, I don't understand why all these things are happening." But the Lord said, "I am with you, and you go." So we know that Gideon was called not only to serve his people as a spiritual leader, but actually to be a military leader for his people. The Lord said, "I want you to take these Midianites and Amalekites, these nomadic people from the eastern regions that had invaded Israel. I want you to kick them out. I want you to send them back and restore some peace and prosperity to your land." And so this is the story in Gideon chapter 6 and also, in Judges chapter 6 and also in Judges chapter 7 in the Old Testament. Before I get to the point that I really would like to discuss and talk about, I want to discuss very briefly the warfare and the weapons back in those days, and give me a couple moments to do this and I'll come back to it. I mean, I think you'll understand why I want to make this point when I come back to it. You know, that we're talking about 1200 years before Christ, so this was a very primitive time technologically. And these folks didn't have a whole lot at their disposal. I mean, their weapons of war were mostly spears, bows and arrow, and slingshots and things like that. They didn't have anything like what they didn't understand or even had no clue about the type of warfare and weapons that we have today. And the strategy that they had to use when they fought battles with each other also was fairly simple, straightforward. It was usually a face-to-face battle in some way, shape, or form. You might use some kind of land formation to your advantage. If you could get up the hill and fight down the hill, that was certainly a plus. Of course, they would ambush each other and hide and then jump out on catching people by surprise. I mean, they could do those kind of things, but their battles were brutal and very frightening. I don't know if it was more or less frightening than today, but they certainly didn't have drones and they couldn't fight from a distance and so forth as we can today. Winning a battle for those people and the warriors in those days was pretty straightforward. You either outnumbered your enemy, or you outmuscled your enemy, or you outmaneuvered your enemy, and that was just about it. It was just soldier against soldier, and it wasn't fancy. And Israel, because they were a poor country and a small country, rarely ever had advantage numerically or technologically of peoples around them. Actually, it was quite the opposite. You know, think about the old country song, "You got the gold mine and I got the shaft." Well, it seems like that Israel was always up against other countries that had somehow gotten the gold mine and they were left with the shaft. I think about the Philistines later in the time of King David. They had iron. They got iron technology. And so they were able to make spears and other utensils that they needed out of iron, which was much harder metal than the Israelites had. I think about the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians later on, of course, but they had horses and chariots to a large degree. Many of their soldiers, they could send in whole troops mounted in chariots. Israel never fought with horses and chariots. There were a few. The kings and sometimes the generals might have a chariot, and there were a few horses. But they had nothing nearly of the type that their neighbors had. In this story, in Genesis 6 and 7, here again, Israel is behind the 8 ball compared to their enemies, because these Midianite people and the Amalekite people, it says there in the story, came on camels. Thousands. It says the camels were like grasshoppers that covered the land. And so these men were able to ride around. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm on foot, I don't want to fight a guy on a camel. I mean, you have a distinct disadvantage. Camels are not only kind of weird, they're tough and they're fast. And so Israel was, again, at a disadvantage. Now, you know this story. I'm not going to read all of it. You can read it in Genesis 6 and in Judges 6 and Judges 7. But the Lord asked Gideon to put together an army, and so Gideon did that, and he came up with 32,000 men. Not a whole lot compared to the untold thousands that were there invading. And the Lord said, that's too many. And Gideon says, what are you talking about? The Lord said, well, you know, even though it's only 32,000, if you would win, you're going to think your savvy and your skill did it. I don't want any of that. I want to get credit for this victory. So, see who wants to go home. If anybody wants to go home, let them go home. And so Gideon made a little speech, and he said, hey, this battle's no big deal. Maybe some of you are scared. Maybe some of you are worried that Pizza Hut will already be closed by the time you get home. If you're really not into this and you don't want to fight, just go on home now. 22,000 of them left. And so now he had 10,000. And the Lord again said to Gideon, way too many men, Gideon. And you remember this strange story, how he led them down to the river. And these men drank water. And based on how they drank water, Gideon gave them the thumbs up or he gave them the thumbs down. And when that whole thing was finished, out of 10,000, 9,700 of them were weeded out. And Gideon was left with these 300 men that we read about. And these 300 men who accomplished this exploit that could not have ever been anything that they accomplished. And that's what the Lord wanted them to understand, that even though it was very bizarre how it happened, this was vintage God. He was going to deal with this enemy and this invader in His own way. It's mind-boggling. They didn't even have weapons when they went after the Midianite people. In fact, it tells us very plainly that when they went to actually engage this enemy and where the troops were camped, they didn't have any actual weapons of war. They didn't have weapons that could kill. They didn't have swords. They didn't have knives. Of course, there were no poison or hand grenades or any of those kind of things because they didn't have them. But they didn't even have spears with them. Let me read from Judges chapter 7, just a couple verses. This is in verse 16. Gideon divided the 300 men into 3 companies, so there was 100 guys in each one. And he placed trumpets and empty jars into the hands of all of them with torches inside. Watch me, he said. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, you do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow your trumpet and shout the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Now, it tells us that this happened at night. The Midianites had camped to a large degree together. There was a huge encampment. And so the plan was to sneak up on them and surround them while they're sleeping at night. And then this strange battle strategy was to unfold. Now, it says earlier in that chapter that Gideon gave to each of these 300 men these supplies. So apparently he prepared them. And they were a strange group of weapons. And I'm being specific here because I want to make a point with this. The first thing it says was that each of the soldiers was to have a trumpet. Now, I don't have a trumpet. I see a deer horn laying here, so I'll use this. So we're going to pretend that this is a trumpet. And it even specifies that that was to go in their right hand. So if you can picture a trumpet here, and they're going to blow it. In the left hand, it says they were to have a torch. I'm in my house, and my wife wouldn't give me permission to light my torch, which I would have loved to do. So I'm going to use this spotlight. I don't know, I don't want to shine it in the camera here, but you can see this thing's fairly bright. So this is my torch. This was to be in their left hand, and the trumpet was to be in their right hand. And they were to sneak up and surround the enemy in the night. Now, you might have a question. How you're going to have a torch, a bright light, a fire, and sneak up on someone in the dark when you got a bright light in your hand? Good question. And of course, Gideon had an answer for that. Oh, he said, you're going to take some sort of an earthenware piece of pottery, a crock, a jug, a jar. Translations give it different terminologies. I see a bowl here. I think Brian Simmons made this bowl for me. I'm going to just use this as an illustration. And what Gideon said was, I want you to go ahead and light your torch, and as we sneak up on the enemy, I want you to take the crock, the jar, and put it over the lit torch so that they can't see it. Now you're in the dark and you can sneak up on them. Of course, you know, unlike a bright light that is actually just a bunch of LEDs made in China and purchased at Walmart, a torch was the only kind of light they had. These people just, fire was all they had for light of any kind. And so they had a torch. But you cannot stop and light a torch when you're trying to be quiet and surprise someone. You're going to lay your trumpet down and start lighting your torch. At the same time, you can't have your torch lit and then sneak up on them. There's not an on-off button like there is with this spotlight. And so this was the solution. Light the torch, put the crock or the jug over the torch so that now essentially your torch is doused, but underneath it's burning. There had to be some way for airflow under there. And take your trumpet in your other hand and sneak up on the enemy. Surround them. It says it was the first watch or the middle watch of the night. So this is when they're in their dead deep sleep. And these 300 men circled around the camp. And Gideon said, when I give the signal, when I blow my trumpet, I want you to do several things simultaneously. I want you, first of all, to take the crock, the jar, the jug, and break it. Now, how in the world are they going to do that? I don't know. Maybe if you're standing near a rock or a tree, you can smack the thing. Maybe they just took their trumpet, if it was hard enough, and gave it a whack. I'm not sure exactly how. Maybe they just simply flung it out through across the rock. They just took the thing and flung it off of it. In any case, it's going to break. And so Gideon used that as the description. Break the jar off of your torch. And simultaneously, there would be this crash. And again, picture this. This is coming from all around these men. 300 guys surrounding the camp. All of a sudden, crash! All this pottery is breaking and busting. And the same moment, the trumpets begin to blow. And the lights now are shining. You know, if you can, and the guys are yelling. the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And if you can imagine, you know, if you were sound asleep in your tent and suddenly you hear this tremendous crash, and while you're trying to open your eyes to figure out what that is, suddenly there's a bright light shining in your tent, and you hear men screaming and yelling and trumpets blow. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think I'd have gone right out through the side of that tent and my Fruit of the Looms. I'd have been busting my way out of there, which is exactly what happened. The whole point of this was to cause panic and confusion, shock and awe, scare the wits out of them in the middle of the night, which is exactly what happened. And the process of this was that as suddenly in the darkness and the slumber, there's all this noise and bodies and lights shining and flashing. And as other guys, other soldiers jumped up out of their tents and they're running, and you see shadows moving and you have no idea who's who, and these lights are shining every which way. I mean, it's going to lead to confusion real fast. And before you know it, some guy had taken his club and slugged somebody up over the head. And here it was his tent mate. It was one of his own fellow soldiers. And then somebody speared somebody else in the confusion and the darkness. And these guys start killing each other. It's friendly fire. Remember, ironically, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon was no sword at all. There were no swords. But it was God's sword. It was the sound and the sight. It was the vocal and the visual. All come together at once. And this just created tremendous panic. And in the confusion, it says the Midianites fled. And they also fought one another. And many of them were killed there on that night. Now, that's a strange story. It's an interesting story. But of course, I'm not just here with this camera to tell you that story. You can read that in Judges chapter 7. I want to talk about the implications of breaking the jug, of breaking the outward covering, of breaking the external part to reveal the internal part, because that's the message that I feel like that the Lord has given me for today, for you, about brokenness. You know, brokenness comes in many forms. Brokenness comes to our health, to our marriages, to our friendships, our contracts, and in this crazy moment of time in which we're currently living, it's come for all of us through this pandemic, to our entire world. The coronavirus has broken our fragile world, our lifestyles, our institutions, our customs, our freedom, our economy. All kinds of things are just busted and broken like so many crocks and jars and jugs. Our comfortable lives, our comfortable expectations are laying on the ground like so much broken pottery. And we shake our heads. And we say, what a waste. What a bummer. How sad this is. That people can't go to work. That people can't do the things, wonderful things that they had planned to do or that they were prepared to do. You know, when you think of the crocks and the jugs and the jars, these people lived in a culture where this was their stock and trade. I mean, these things were valuable to them. They were useful. Some of them were probably expensive for them, and they were shattered. They were broken. And I doubt sincerely that somebody came to the battlefield the next day and picked up all the pieces and restored them and returned them to the owner. That didn't happen then, and that's not going to happen with this thing. You know, some things that are already broken are already lost currently. There are businesses that are closed that are not going to reopen. And so this is the kind of thing that we have to simply accept about this current crisis that we are in. That some of these things, we're never going to get back in the way that they were before. I saw such a poignant picture a day or two ago. It was a wedding. Some young couple had planned to be married this week, and No coronavirus was going to stop their wedding, so they got married. It was an outdoor wedding, looked like just a few people there. But they were wearing masks. And I had to think, my heart just went out to them when I saw that picture. Can you imagine that bride when she had engaged a photographer, all excited about her wedding? Never did she dream she would be wearing a mask for her wedding pictures. We have to just accept it. And even if someday this thing is done and they get the photographer back and they repose, they'll all know that that wasn't the original thing. That day, and with all of its bright expectations, is irretrievably broken. And this is where we are. And this is the kind of thing that we have to accept. But my message for you today is about the torch that's underneath the jar. The jar was broken, but the torch still burned. In fact, once the jar was broken, the torch burned brighter than ever. It was burning, but then when all this external stuff was busted off of it, then it had the chance to really burn with a fervor. The torch is our spirit in this analogy. The torch is our enthusiasm. The torch is our love. It's the inner part of us that says, God has given me life. God has given me love. And you might hardly have noticed the real, true inner me, because I've had all this stuff on top of it. All this stuff that I've wanted to have, all this stuff that I needed to do. It's just like a crock or a jar. It's kind of covered over the inward spirit, the real person. But now, some of this stuff is not hindering me in the same way. There's an opportunity for the true me, the real me, the torch, the light, shine brighter than ever. School can be closed, but my torch still burns. Church might be canceled, but the same Holy Spirit still lights me and is still shining from my life. You can break my paycheck, but the torch still burns. You can close down the church building or the church program, but you can't close down the church, because the torch still shines. It still burns. You can break off of me the trips, the reunions, the meetings, the celebrations, all the things that I had anticipated, but you can't break my spirit, because all of those things were external and they didn't touch the real person that I am. Everything may be shut down. Material goods may become scarce. Normal life might seem more and more to be broken, like these jars of Gideon's army. But look what's underneath all of those externals. My conscience is still there. My love still works. My faith is intact. These things are the torch that's often covered over by all of the external factors of life that we get so caught up in that sometimes we forget whether the torch is burning at all or not. We look at a person once in a while and we say, is anybody home? They're so busy. They're so caught up in so many things. That the light doesn't even shine out because the jug is hanging over top of it all. And I think this story illustrates to me this inner and outer reality. The schools and the schedules, these places where I go, underneath of them is the real person. my work, my worship, these things that I do, underneath of all that is the real person. These possessions, these paychecks, all these things that I have, underneath all them is the real person. Me. I am like the flame of Gideon's torch. Sometimes I'm covered over. Sometimes I'm smothered under. All sorts of exciting, wonderful, exquisite, awesome pieces of pottery. But guess what? If a deadly virus comes along, if a worldwide pandemic comes along, and it breaks every one of those beautiful jars, it did not break me. It will only cause my flame to just flare up brighter, because all the stuff that absorbed it and kept it dark and kept it covered are now gone. You know, the virus, what I'm trying to say is the virus can break my jar, but it cannot break me. The virus can shut down my job, but it cannot shut down my enthusiasm for life and my love for life, or my love for people, or my love for the Lord. The virus may keep me from participating in something, but it cannot keep me from praying for those very things or for other people. The virus cannot destroy the image of God in me. It only can reveal the image of God. And so the crocks, the jars, the jugs, they had to be broken to reveal the light. The light was there, but it was wrapped up. It was absorbed by this heavy, dense, shadowy reality that was necessary. It was part of the strategy. You had to get up there without them seeing the light. So they covered it over. But then when the moment came and it was time for the light to shine, break the jars. Break the jars off of them. And amazingly, that's when they shouted. You know, in other words, when the jars broke, they weren't stopping. They were just getting started. Think about that. The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So, even though it's discouraging, heartbreaking, terrible, some of the adjectives that you hear to describe this mess, they're all true. At the same time, we have something to shout about, because we are God's light. We are the sword of the Lord against whatever kind of evil, whatever form of evil that we come up against. And when the other parts of our lives get dislodged, get changed, get turned inside out, get broken, it does not destroy the torch, the image, the life, the love of God within us. So, don't worry about it. Just look at the torch and yell. Blow the trumpet and yell. My prayer, and I'm sure all of us, is that like these Midianites killed each other off in friendly fire because they were so confused with all this stuff happening, I pray that this virus will just knock itself out from all the attention and prevention and isolation and medication and all these things that were thrown at it. I pray it just gets so confused that it dies off, that it just kills itself. But in the process, it's messed up a lot of normalcy for us. We'll remember this time later on. But even when the jugs are broken, when the jars are broken, the flame is only turned loose and revealed to burn brighter. My prayer for all of you, our church family, is that if you're off work, if you're in some strange situation, maybe you're working more than you normally work, Our circumstances are extremely different from each other in how this thing is affecting us. Some people are being worked to death. Some people don't know what to do with themselves. But the normalcy is what I'm talking about that's being broken. It's okay. The cost of defeating an enemy. But the people, the image of God, the love, that is not broken. And it will not be by this virus or any others. You're in our prayers. I want to say, as you watch this, that just to remind you, a message from our Spiritual Care Commission or from our church board, if you have a need, whether it's transportation or groceries or financial help or whatever, please feel free to call somehow or let someone know. We would be honored to help you or reach out to you in any way that we could. Okay, let me lead you in a moment of prayer. Father, as we think of this wonderful but weird story from your word, it just reminds us that you can work in the most unusual of ways. And you didn't need any help to get rid of that evil, to get rid of those invaders. You just needed some cooperation from Gideon and his men. And we realize you don't need our help to destroy this virus, or to bring back peace and prosperity. You can do that any way you choose. But we do want to cooperate with you. We also want to cooperate with each other. We want to support and encourage each other. And so we just pray for one another in this moment. Wherever folks are watching this or whenever they're watching it, I know that they're thinking of other people that they normally sit with on Sunday morning, that they might see, that they might hug or shake their hand, or that they might just look forward to that time of singing and worship and praying together. That's broken for this moment. But our relationship and our love is not broken. So keep us together even while we're apart. May your healing and your help be given to everyone who has a specific need this morning or today. We will thank you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, from Tina, one more. I had a clown that held the door open for me today. I thought it was a nice gesture. Have a good day. You have our love and prayers.